That's one reason I needed that saw on the ground. I want to talk a little bit about the limitations of empiricism. What can't you do with empirical research? What cannot be done with empirical research? What are the limitations? All right? Let's just think about that a moment. Some of these we have already mentioned this week. All you've got to do is scratch back in your recall and in the growing consciousness that you're developing. What can't you do with scientific research, whether social science or natural science or whatever?
Answer should or ought questions.
Thank you. Answer questions of should or ought. Quite literally, answer judgment. It can't be used to do that. This is why it distresses me when some of you have as a research problem, how can I build a training program? What kind of a question is that? Primarily, what should I do? And you can't answer what should I do empirically. So you say, well, what good is research if I can't answer should questions? Because the only questions that are important in life are should questions. Do you believe that? You really have to know what's going on. When you start a car in the morning, you say, what should I do? Should I turn the key to the right or to the left? But the real issue there is not a should question. The real question there is, how does this thing work? Does it work to the right or to the left? That's not a should question. The should question is, should I go to work this morning? Should I get up today? Should I stay home today? Science doesn't answer that. The science answers the question, how does the car work? You need both an empirical consciousness and you need a subjective, rational approach to matters of right and wrong. And the empirical doesn't give you direct help on the right and wrong. Now, if we really understand human nature, if we really understand enough about the human being, we know that one of the roles of parents is to make decisions about when to feed a child. Should I feed this kid or not? Should I feed this kid now, and should I feed this kid this stuff or that stuff? Those of you who've been parents, which is I think most of you in the room. In what realm is that question? It sounds like a should question, doesn't it? It's not. It's not. How do you answer that sort of a question? You answer that sort of a question in terms of what is good, needed, appropriate for that child at that moment, in that circumstance. Am I right? What happens to people who wait until somehow they get divine inspiration as to when to feed their children?
They don't feed them.
It's a very, very stupid way to be a parent. Simply to go through like uninformed. There's objective information about this. In fact, ironically, in religious sects, one of the early things that happens is when people are so dependent on outside authority, they quit using their reason, and they say, well, God asked me to do this, or didn't ask me to do this, or God told me not to. And people like that nowadays go to court, and they go to jail for child neglect. And they should. There's a judgment call. There's an opinion question. There's a non-empirical, a judgment. We operate in both realms in life. We've got to know where to use what and when is appropriate to think in terms of what we know about the human being. For example, there's a cult right now among evangelical Christians that has a cultish way of dealing with the emotional instability of small children. Now, what are manifestations of emotional instability in anybody? What are the most common manifestations of emotional instability? Huh? What?
Lose the temper.
Lose their temper. Lose their temper, and sometimes we say go into a rage, go into a tantrum. That's a very common English word that technical word we use only that way. We use tantrum only with reference to an emotionally unstable, particularly child, who is suddenly acting out, lying on the floor, throwing his hands around and screaming. Have any of you ever had a child do that to you? The rest of you are dishonest. There's a cultish way of dealing with that today that is being publicized widely and is being written about, and you can go to the Christian bookstores, including over here at Trinity, and buy books about how to handle that in a very cultish, dangerous way. I'm not going to name names, I'm not here to shoot that one down, but I am terribly alarmed about it because it flies in the face of virtually all scientific understanding of what emotional development is like, what contributes to it positively, and what inhibits it. And literally what it says is, in that thesis, this is a little oversimplified, but basically, beat it out of the kid. Because it's evil. Well, that's a crock of baloney. What you're seeing is the way the good Lord made the human being. The good Lord made the human being among all the animal creatures, among the most dependent of all infant creatures. How many of you ever have seen a horse being born? You ever seen a horse being born? Some of you raised on a farm or been around farms, you've seen a horse being born. You could say the same thing of several other animals, almost all four-footed animals that are upright, standing, in contrast with those that wallow in mud. But it's particularly notable in the horse. What do you remember most about that moment of watching, let's say, the first hour of the birth of a horse? What do you remember?
The way I try to stand up.
Ah! That does not surprise me that you said that. In fact, I was willing to let you go unstructured and let you just respond, because most people will say something about standing within the first 3 or 4 sentences. Your fourth or fifth word. Standing. Now, what is there about that standing that impresses you?
Very wobbly to start with.
Very wobbly to start with, but
Yeah.
But they can. But they can. How many of you have ever seen a 6-month-old child stand? Only with help, and wobbly, my gosh. downright impossible. The horse is minimally dependent. The human infant is maximally dependent. Only the marsupials give birth to creatures that are more dependent. Those are the ones that stick them in a pouch for the first so many months. Kangaroos and actually bears too. But there are some animals that arrive in pretty remarkable state of development. In fact, within the first half day, that colt will not only be on feet, but will be relatively stable and running. And even more intriguing, alertly following mother. Now, why did God do that? And by contrast, why did God create humans so that the virtual opposite is true?
We have so much to learn. If we weren't dependent, we wouldn't stick around long enough to learn.
There you go. There's something about what God is saying about understanding relationships in the human that he doesn't even expect the animals to learn. The other animals. He doesn't even expect them to get that. And he expects the human being to understand dependency and responsibility. And human beings who are suddenly parenting, and by the way, it's one of the marvels of God's creation that he left parenting in the hands of amateurs. And if they're not carefully responsible and willing to learn, they're going to have profound difficulties. And in fact, that's one of the things that's wrong with American society right now, is that there are profound difficulties because of lack of that accountability, responsibility in parents. When the human being develops with an emergent pattern that is within the being, but it's a pattern that depends extensively on outside support and outside influences in order that it can be fully realized as a development pattern. The pattern in the human being is every bit as strong as the pattern in the horse, but it is extremely slower, and it is extremely more complex, and it is extremely more dependent, illustrating the urgency of the social nature of the human experience. One of the things that distinguishes a knowledgeable educator is the understanding of how the social relationships play into the learning processes of human beings. One of the saddest things about contemporary education is our tendency for the last 50 years to individualize at the expense of social experience. We have individualized as a kind of a latter-day fulfillment of the industrial era, which says that everybody should go as fast as they possibly could, because that's in the name of efficiency. So we let everybody proceed at their own rate, assuming that at least the fast ones will go faster then, and the slow ones can catch up later. As a consequence, we get, yes, great diversity in learner groups, but we also break that pattern of dependency and literally create orphans. And intellectual orphans are pathetic. Many intellectuals in this world today are intellectual orphans. They don't pay attention to one another. They don't let each other help. They have this presumption that they get from school that every piece of product should be done so that one can compete independently, and the competing is an extremely important part of it. Therefore, the getting of grades is always a, if I do, you won't. If you do, I won't. So therefore, I don't let you see this. And I don't let you, I'm not going to give you help because that would hurt me. What a terrible, terrible thing. It creates intellectual orphans. So then we come to the place where even leaders in academic fields will privatize the things that they do to the point where they don't want to share them with colleagues, because if colleagues saw this, they might get the same idea and write it better than I can. So I kind of keep things to myself till I'm ready to publish. I can tell you that one of the big differences between Michigan State University and Trinity lay along that axis, and it took me a little while to get used to. I had done by that time a lot of consulting work in theological schools and in other Christian institutions, because I even had taken sabbaticals in such places and gone there and taught and so forth. But when I came over here on a full-time basis, something struck me that I had never realized. And that is, at the university, hardly any of us dared publish anything until our colleagues had read it, critiqued it, commented on it, and had attempted to help us make it a little more substantial. So if I was publishing a book or a major article, I would circulate it to my departmental colleagues. And usually about half of them would find a time at coffee break or something to say, hey, you know that piece you sent me yesterday? On the second page, you say so and so and so and so. Do you really believe that? I said, yeah, I kind of think I do. And the guy would say, well, I don't. I think you're off. I think you're off. Well, then I say, well, what do you think? How do you look at it? And he says, thus and such and thus and such. And I say, well, yeah, I hear you. 2 days later, I go back to the guy at the coffee break and I say, I see more thoroughly what you were saying, and I've been reworking that. How does this look? And I'm giving him a new alternative, page 2. And he says, now you're talking. That was standard. We rarely published without that kind of informal review by colleagues. When I got over here, I found out that individuals publish very privately. And usually, if you even heard that a certain individual was publishing another book, it was only in terms of what the title was and maybe something about the theme of it. But, gee, I'm interested in getting that. And you wait till you get it off the bookshelf. And then you interact with your colleague and say, you know, that's a nice book, Charles. And, intellectual orphans. Intellectual orphans. No social relationship of quality. No sense of parenting. And that's what can happen even in the community of faith. The scripture uses this image of the family. You don't have to talk about family to explain horses. You may talk about lineage. And you know, who was the sire, but you know, that's a great 15 minutes a night. That's not it. In human experience, parenting is something very, very different. And intended to be very, very different. Learning is intended to function within that total community of family. Learning is a process of sharing and letting one another become part of my learning process, rather than privatizing, holding apart. That's why we so earnestly talk about community of faith, community of learning. It's the same imagery. Your faith develops in community relationships. One of you wants to work on this question of small groups as a stimulus to spiritual development. Does that make sense? Small groups as a stimulus to spiritual development? Well, let me tell you, there are people, even in this institution, who would say, that's pretty far-fetched. Spiritual development is a matter of your relationship to God. And I say, buddy, that's only part of it. That's only part of it. Absolutely, small groups and the relationship, family and the relationship to spiritual development. Human partnership and spiritual development. Come on, now we're talking. Does that make sense? So, what's the limitation of social science? Social science can inform us of what is. Social science, any science, can inform us of what is. It will interact with your enlightenment from a spiritual domain, from a social domain, to help steer you toward answers to what should. Again, let me repeat that. Social science can inform you of what is. And it interacts with other sources of enlightenment in the spiritual realm and in the social realm to enable you to deal wisely with questions of what should be, what ought. So have I just said that social science does have a relationship to curriculum planning? Yes or no?
Yes.
Absolutely yes. Will social science answer the question, what should I do in a given curriculum? No. Will it help? It will help by interacting with other sources of enlightenment, particularly in the spiritual realm and in the social realm. And as those sources of understanding interact, you will get a clearer picture of what you ought to do. In other words, it's not that it can't relate, it's just that the process is more complicated than that. Now what happens when you ask the should or ought question right off in the social science domain?
You don't know what actually operates.
That's right. You're ruling out what really will be the rest of that basis of operation. And you're asking a narrow source of truth to answer a question that is bigger than that domain.
It gives you bias too.
Oh, yeah. Good point. It reveals your bias. Does that help at all? You see, you've got to be warned off expecting too much. But you've got to be encouraged to see more of the connections. And there's a frustration here, because after you go to all this effort to try to build skills in social science, then you say, I still can't answer these really important questions with it. I can't use it to put my nickel in and get the answer out. No, it's more complicated than that.
You could say the same thing with theology as long as it's dealing with people, okay? Social science.
One of the fundamental limitations in science is that we can only deal with things if we can ask appropriate questions about them. Science is generated by the questions that we ask. And if I'm asking an irrelevant question or an immature question and investing in finding the answer to an irrelevant or immature question, what is going to be the outcome of that activity? Pardon?
Same as the question of wars.
The immaturity is not going to change. If an immature question is asked, then an immature concept will emerge or understanding. So I'm not going to gain much ground. You're right. So somehow I've got to develop enough maturity and understanding of the phenomenon so that I know what questions are worth asking and are literally askable or precisely answerable. Those are judgment calls themselves. And quite often science doesn't help us a lot with that directly. But what happens particularly if a person is not reading carefully on this topic, whatever the topic is? What happens if a person is not reading carefully before entering into the scientific process?
Have a simplistic framework for trying to process what you're investigating.
And connected back to the main point of this particular argument, which is all of what you say, and that is going to produce then asking of immature questions. The only way you can mature the questions you ask is to know more about what is already understood about this phenomenon. And if you don't know what is already understood about this phenomenon, you have no idea whether or not you're asking an immature or literally absurd question. Does that make sense? So what is the first responsibility then for anybody that expects to make a fundamental contribution to human understanding? What's the first task? Being informed, and specifically reading. Reading carefully, reading with a sense of judgment, not taking everything at face value, shrewdly asking the question, is this really grounded, or is this just pulled out of the air? Is this person just blowing, or is this person really passing along a grounded proposition? One of the really keen problems that we have to watch for is that within religion, and it's not just Christianity, within religion, people become very tolerant of blow. B-L-O-W. Anybody want to translate that? Within religion, people become very tolerant of blow. What am I saying? No idea.
Tendency to just, do a lot of high air that's not really substantive.
Okay, hot air, blow. There are a lot of other common words that we use, and I just wanted to use one of the common words and say simply, we've become very accustomed to hot air. That sounds a little more judgmental. I thought it'd be a little bit less harsh to say blow. Because what I'm driving at is stuff that is only about half true. But stuff that is said with such conviction or said from such a sedate platform that it comes across as if it were truth. Many people accept baloney. For those of you who do not know baloney, that is an Americanism, very long used, to represent that which is a bunch of ground up stuff stuffed into a distended intestine and ultimately cooked in some manner and then eaten by the unsuspecting. You are aware of it. You know, I mean, I'm not telling you anything new, right? Okay. Well, the fact that it was invented by the Italians doesn't change it at all. It's still and we use that as a metaphor for, well, to put it more politely, hot air. And hot air is just simply blah, 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 which is perhaps a little less respectful. Let me reword my statement. Religion, not just Christianity, but religion, tends to increase people's tolerance for baloney. Religion tends to increase people's tolerance for hot air. Religion tends to increase people's tolerance for half-truth. Religion tends to increase the likelihood that people will believe something without evidence if it is said by the right person. Are those statements unfair? Do I sound like I'm attacking Christianity? Absolutely not. I'm simply trying to raise the standard. There's plenty to speak about, plenty to share, plenty to reflect upon, plenty to preach about in Christianity that is truth. I fervently believe that. So it seems to me very, very unfortunate when people deal in half-truth. The doctors of the church have a responsibility there. The educators for the Christian community have a responsibility there. That's you. A profound responsibility. We should be very, very cautious about the way we indoctrinate people into believing things simply because they're said by people who have theology degrees. We should be very, very cautious about having people believe us simply because we have a doctor's degree. We should be very, very cautious about taking advantage of people who tend to trust us. And sharing with them our learned opinions about things in such a way that they say, ooh, I'm so glad you explained that. Now I understand it. Whenever anybody says to me, now I understand it, I immediately go into a, ooh, you think, what have I been saying? Was that responsible? Was what I was saying responsible? Do I really want to take responsibility for having this person say, now I see it? And in fact, now I see it your way. Is that a responsible thing? And what can I do to correct it if it wasn't? Because I need to correct it quickly. That's responsibility. Sometimes when we think we're speaking from scientific data and evidence, we overstate or try to over-persuade. This is a limitation of science. Tendency to overstate or over-persuade. So now we've named two limitations. There are a number. What are the two we've named so far today? Science cannot answer all categories of questions. Particularly, it's inept in the realm of should or ought. What else have we said? Limitation of science. A little harder to say than the first one, but say it. Somebody take the floor and say it clearly. Speak up.
Required using the right questions?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd forgotten we touched that one as we were past it too. That one was in there too. Three actually. That was the second. Expand that one so we touch it off and move it.
Well, if for good, if you don't get much of the word in computers, garbage in, garbage out. So it's the same in research. If you have rotten questions or immature questions, then you're going to get immature
Yeah, I'm glad you remembered that one. I forgot to take that one off. Good. All right, then the third one. It tends to make us feel so sure that we tend to overstate or exaggerate or fail to indicate what the limitation is. That's one reason that we urge people to design their research in such a way that they indicate what their limitations will be. What will be the limitations of the uses of these outcomes or findings. That's a fairly mature concept, and I'm not going to be dealing with it here. I'm not going to be looking for it on the Monday reading, but some of you may want to start paying attention to it. So much for the philosophy of science for today. The spiritual platform, the philosophy of science, and the techniques. Now we're going into the techniques, and this is where we're going into the workshop that was promised for today. As we go into that, I want to go back to the worksheet and touch a couple bases from yesterday that we did not develop thoroughly, alluded to but did not develop thoroughly. On Thursday, the third session, the first word there is design elements. And right now, in your workshop today, you are going to be dealing with design elements. So we ought at least name them and be able to use these concepts. What do we mean when we say design elements in reference to research?
Those components that will give order to our research piece.
Those components that will give order to our research piece. Let's find a better word there. Because the issue is not the finished product, but the process. But the process, yes. Your sentence was great, just ended with the word process and you got it. Those things that would give order to our research process. Now specifically, give me an example of a design element. Just, pick it out from anywhere. What's a design element?
Problem. Research problem.
The research problem is a design element, good. And that's one reason we start there. Let's learn how to do that kind of defining that gets specific. And by the way, I've got all your papers read and I've got all of them marked. And I will talk to you about that a little later. But that's where you're working on this first design element problem, which is the research problem, research question. Those are design elements, okay? Some more design elements.
Research procedures.
The procedures you use are design elements. The idea of, for example, using an interview, that's a design element. The sample that you're going to interview, that's a design element. How do you get the sample? What population does it represent? How did you choose that population? Why did you choose that population? All those decisions are design elements. Now, all those things are within your hands. You're like you're like an artist. You can pull from any one of a number of colors and decide exactly where to put it in. Now, there's a general sense of shape here, and you have to be responsible to the general shape of things, but it's going to be as peculiar as your footprint, as your fingerprint. It's going to be unique because you're using design elements according to your own sense of judgment and design. Would you say that research design is more a matter of technique or art?
It's an art in using the techniques.
And that's why it's a bad question the way I put it. You're right. Dead right. You can't choose. But what so often people will do at about this point in the course is presume that it's all technique, and you just got to learn the rules of those techniques. No, it's an artful thing. That's why I say it's as unique as your fingerprint. It's going to be a reflection of what you've decided to do. How many do I need in my sample, for example? Is there a rule on that? Now, there are general guidelines that you use for different purposes. For example, if you want $1 million for a study with a sample of 15 people, the odds are that somebody's going to say, he needs $1 million to work with 15 people. He must be going to live with them for In other words, there's going to be some proportions in this. So yeah, there are guidelines, but there aren't rules. Consider this statement. An ethnographic research cannot be valid with less than 25 subjects. You buy that? Don't buy that. Don't buy it. That's not even a bad proposition. That's just a silly statement. There aren't those sorts of rules. But there are guidelines about design elements. And the design elements literally are and the reason we call them design elements is because otherwise we call them variables within your research. But we restrict the word variables for a technical use within that. See it? So you don't willy-nilly throw around the word variables. And design elements is just a little, a big word to talk about all those little choices. All right? Concern, research concern. Are we clear on what a research concern is? Do the best you can. Let's see how close you can come. How would you define it?
Kind of the big picture about the problem.
You could be more precise than that. It's not the big picture so much as it is, and here's where your personality, your personal sense, your judgment's going to get into it. What is it about that domain or problem that concerns you? Notice how we use the word concern.
So it's a personal issue.
Are you at all aware of the tension in Kosovo? For you, is that a concern? Pardon?
It's not a personal concern, but an actual voice concern.
See, we don't stick the word personal on there. We'll say, is it a concern? Do you feel any sense of burden and concern about that? I always use an acid test with Christians. Would you want to pray about that? And if you say yes, the issue is not, is it a personal concern? See, that's why I was backing off when you said personal. But the degree of personalness, or how close it gets to the core of your life, is not really the issue. It's whether or not you have a sense of anxiety, compassion, motivation. See, what have I drawn on? Anxiety, motivation, compassion. What are those things? Pardon? They're emotional, and indeed they're personal. But the degree of localness to your situation is irrelevant. So the research concern is then a relating of that problem to your anxiety, motivation, burden. Well, so it has a subjectivity to it. I am really interested in that. And if the interest is more than curiosity itself, then it's probably concern. If the only thing that drives you in the research problem is curiosity, you may have trouble finding the research concern. But if it's anything bigger than sheer curiosity, that's concern. Now, why do we say concern is important to consider in designing research? Research is objective, research is cold, research is, unreal. So why are we asking a question about research concern?
It's energy.
Very good answer. It's really what you have to draw upon to maintain your interest in this research problem. You know what my definition of pathetic is? Pathetic is a person halfway through a dissertation that the person has lost interest in. Seriously, that happens. That's my definition of pathetic. Pathetic is a person halfway through a dissertation in which they have lost interest. When you select a dissertation, and you say, well, I've tried a lot of ideas, but I think this one might work. I know you're in trouble. The person says, I've tried several ideas, and there are a lot of things that I really find myself interested in. It's hard for me to make a choice, but I really keep coming back to this one. Why do you come back to this one? There's something about this one that just says, that's what I really want to do. I say, go for it. Go for it. Get yourself tuned to your concern, and you're going to have a greater likelihood of sustaining your point. Very good. All right? That's the issue. What's the problem? You know that one. We talked about that one inside and out. You see the relationship between problem and questions now. That's what you did yesterday. I was really pleased to talk about these. You understand sample. You understand instruments. Do you understand displays? We've mentioned it once, maybe twice. Do you remember the context we mentioned displays?
What you do with the data.
That's right. Displays is a matter of how you show data. Now, sometimes there's graphs, sometimes there's tables, sometimes it's just statements. But the general idea is that if it's a display, it's a display of findings. All right? So it's a generic word, general word, broad word for what you get as outcomes from your study. Now, a display is what you would put in section 4 to show your findings. In a proposal, a display might be what we call an empty display, or an empty graph, or an empty frame. What is an empty frame?
No numbers, no statistics in there, just the
categories,
the X and Y axis or
and
categories.
2 axes. If it's a table, that's what this means, and this is what this means, and this is the units. This is the units here. But don't put any numbers and lines and spots in there because you don't have anything to put them on. I mean, you don't have any basis. To put the spots in there, put the lines in, then there would be predicting. And the rule is don't predict. Okay? That's what a display is. All right. Analytic procedures. That's the general word for what you do when you not collect. Analyze what you collected. So your analytic procedures are what you use after you've collected in order to analyze. If it's a quantitative study, what will those analytic procedures usually be?
Statistics.
Some statistical treatments of the numbers. If it's a qualitative study, what will those analytic procedures be? Verbal analysis. Sometimes called content analysis. And the magic words to get you through this paper is appropriate content analysis will be used. Appropriate content analysis will be used to identify themes, patterns. So when we had 923, you know where this is coming from. Themes, patterns, and similar and dissimilar categories or sets of statements. That's good enough. If you get that sentence in there, you've got the burden of section 4 introduced. And in this particular course, I'm not asking for a whole lot more than that. However, you may want to think through, and I think some of you will be able to think through, what sorts of displays are you have to be able to come up with if you do this. So then you may want to attach some displays that would indicate what you're apt to go toward. Anything that you can give in 4 that would help the reader see what you're planning to do with your data. Conclusions, we surely have that one nailed down. Okay, the other point is the last sentence here, the importance of identifying the research problem in reference to logical analogs. If you have taken 941, how many of you have done 941? How many of you are doing 941 in 2 weeks, 3 weeks? 941 is the course that deals with the literature of your topic. The literature of your topic. How do you use social science literature? And one of the things that people often presume is that you assume you're going to be doing your best work if you can find something that nobody else has ever done before. That's something you learn in the 7th grade. The research is something that great inventors and scientists do things that other people never did. Believe me, that's even true of invention. It's never been true of science. Science always begins with the inquirer standing on the shoulders of previous inquirers. It's just, you know, the chain of people across history. And one of the most important questions that can be asked of a person about a dissertation is, whose shoulders are you standing on? Right, whose shoulders are you standing on? And the answer to that question is not, oh, well, there's this old friend of our family who's been a great inspiration to me across these years, and I just admire him. That's not the right answer. What is the right answer?
Theory. Whose theories?
Not necessarily even the giants, but the people that have plodded along in the direction that you think is important to go, that have given you enough data that you know where to reach next. That's why the metaphor of standing on the shoulders. And you don't do his work over again, or her work over again. You stand on her or his shoulders and reach on up. Now, why do we stand on other people's shoulders?
To build on.
That's right, because otherwise we could not build the field. We could not build human understanding. And research is concerned with opening up new understanding. By the way, one of the characteristics of some of these papers is that technically you're on target in terms of how you're organizing your questions, but the questions themselves are relatively trivial. We've been using this wall over here that keeps falling in on us as a kind of an illustration. I want to use it once more. That wall over there, that we realize is a research problem because that wall keeps moving. And the concern is that it might fall and hurt us. All right? So we've got to get at that to better understand what is making that unstable. And that's exactly what this person here chose to deal with. Research question. What color is the wall? Research question 2. How many walls in the building are colored the same? Question 3. What other colors could be used for the wall? Do you see why I have a problem with that one? What is it? What's the problem? Those are all empirical questions.
But they're not relevant to.
They don't go anywhere. They don't help. They don't relate to our problem. What ground would you have for arguing that the color of the wall has anything at all to do with this? I mean, that's a real far-fetched notion. The person says, well, we don't know, might be. So, well, let's don't waste our time being stupid.
It has to do with the attraction of blue on blue.
That, back to the theory of gravity, I know, very good. Good, you guys are really putting it together well, I appreciate it. Now, by the way, the one I was just reading right here, I marked X. And yes, I did make that up, but it made the point. There are some others that are almost like that, though. Okay, that's the background. Now we're up to speed, we're up to date, we're on schedule for the course, and we're now going to go into workshop mode. Number one, the acid test. How many of you have your draft proposal on paper right now, ready to share? Can I see your timid hands in the air? Amen. Okay. You don't? You suddenly have a credibility problem. It is there.
I'm not ready to share.
Well, you can leave it or share.
Read.
Huh? You ready to share it?
No.
Then you can leave. Out. That's your choice. Share your paper or go. Okay, anybody else in that fix?
I guess not anymore.
Not anymore. There are some things that have to be clear. Okay, good. All right, we are going to share whatever it is, because what we're saying is, I haven't gotten far enough along to be proud of it yet. And if I can't be proud of it, I don't want to lose face. This is a great hour for confession. Great hour for confession. Among Christians, how many of you will have a better paper on Monday than you have today? Raise your hand. All right, there's the confession I really wanted. But how many of you can be helped today if you interact with others in the class? That's what we're after, all right? So the issue today is not evaluation. The issue is how do you make it better? Now let me encourage you not to go one-on-one with anything that gets into realms of problematic or argumentative. Because nobody can be that sure that the person that they're dealing with at that moment is really steering them in the right direction. Try really hard to work in terms of at least two of you try to help another person who seems to be needing help. Not one of you trying to help. Yesterday, we had a lot of one-on-one, which was royal and great, and it was working fine. And that's one reason I suggested groups of 4 yesterday. So we create some pairs of one-on-ones and then interact with them. Today, I'm going to have groups of 3 for the workshop. Groups of 3. This will give you a chance to do what is quite often discomforting, and that is 2 people ganging up on 1. But I want to make sure that we do that ganging up on 1 so that one person does not further mislead another. Does that make sense? And in the mouths of many witnesses, truth is more likely to be found. So I'm going to use 3s and let you work interactively in 3s, and that's going to guarantee we get some 2s on 1s. By the way, in terms of group dynamics, 3 is a bad group if you're trying to get a peer interaction, because it does tend to resolve to 2s on 1s, which can be very tense. But today, for the constructive workshop value, I think it'll work. But don't make the whole morning now be a matter of conflict between 2 of you against 1 of you. Rotate that so that it's 2 on 1 like this, okay? Now that'll mean the first thing to do is to share around a reading, preferably without explanation. This is not a good time for a person to say, well, here's what I meant by this, here's what I meant by this. Let the paper stand alone. Would you please make marks on the paper, however, particularly in the margin. A question mark, which means not clear. An X go with you on that. I can't agree. Now, somebody else is gonna look at that and say, well, I think you're both wrong. I have an X too, but I mean for a different reason. Do all this before you start interacting. Some question marks, some X's. If you really like something, put an exclamation point. That's nice. Or a smiley face if you're good at that stuff. Something that gives some encouragement or affirmation. We're not simply trying to tear people up. We're trying to help them. So you want to mark things that you think need explanation, needs to be more clear, or things that you believe are clearly in the wrong place or stated badly or something of that sort. If you have a problem with the wording, and I had a lot of problem with wording, and this was not an English language problem from non-English speakers, by the way. Some wording difficulties that I had occurred in some people that are native speakers of English, and I couldn't decide what they were saying. Now, indeed, I did have that problem with some people whose second language is English. Yes, I had a lot of problems with wording. But I think yesterday you were kind of tangled up and it almost looked like a bunch of people stuck in fly paper. You were having a hard time pulling loose. And I was absolutely delighted when one person came in to me this morning at the beginning of class and said something that I thought was very reassuring to me, and apparently was reassuring to him. And I asked him if he would at some point today give a testimonial. So, ladies and gentlemen, brethren, if you all get on your knees, I want you to listen to a repentant sinner. You're on.
I told Dr. Ted that I was afraid it was a heresy that put me on the rack, but apparently it wasn't. I just caught with the one I submitted yesterday, and I followed his advice and went home and changed it, and that made me bring
Not
the paper.
changed it, but particularly
I mean, I just started with the
abandoned it
I abandoned it.
and grabbed a new research or a new topic.
Of course, I found one that was a concern to me,
And then,
and then made a new topic, new problem, 2 new questions.
and it worked out.
Well, I don't know. I thought yesterday it was working yesterday, until I came to class.
I told you I was so glad to hear that because I thought he was doing pretty well too in class because we were talking and I was interacting with him and I thought he was getting it and all. But when I got home, my gosh, has he really gotten anywhere with it? You know? So I was kind of worried about it and wondering what I was going to do to make sure that he was really getting on the track here. And he came in and made that statement, and I thought, well, that's delightful. It illustrates what I'm driving at. And that is sometimes the best way to get clear on something is to just say, oh, well, I messed up. Let me start over again with something different. Repairing things that are already in trouble, again, it's back to the metaphor of the car that's at the side of the road. It's going to take you a lot of time to pull it out. And when you have the freedom to get out there and wave the magic wand and get a new car and drive off, it's quicker. And this is one of the rare times in life when you have that freedom. So even at this point, you may want to drop something and drive off. However, most of you at this point probably need shaping help, not that kind of ultimate start over again advice. So try to stick with what you've got today, unless it's a consensus in your group that this just ain't going to fly. I will be available to you. You can call me in whenever you need. Do not prematurely call me in until you wrestle with the problem as a group. I was very appreciative of the way you did it yesterday. I was almost feeling badly because nobody needed me yesterday. I mean, it really hurt me. But it was great. It was great. At the last, a lot of groups finally saw that, yes, we could ask him. So we all did. I mean, the ones that were asked a lot. But try real hard not to be dependent on me from the start today. And I'll come in and try to resolve things or to give you my hunch of what a key to release something will be. Okay? And you will interact with each other in fixed sets of 6. And then we're going to have a couple left over. Let's see how that works. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.